Just give it a click.
Testing.
There we go.
Is that coming through?
I'm testing mine as well. Yes, yours is.
All right, everyone. We are going to make a start. Please do feel free to sit as close to the front as you can stand, if I can put it like that, as you can bear. And we are just going to make a start in just a moment. So please do come and get comfy, grab a seat. There is a handout which Natalia-Nana has produced so that we can follow along with the scripture that you're going to be sharing with us. And so that we can do some exploring together in relation to hope and waiting and some of the more painful and the more difficult aspects of that, as well as aspects of that which might surprise us and which we perhaps can also cherish, especially at this time of year. I was trying to remember when we first met, and I had this lovely recollection where I thought, aha, I remember, because it connects to another theologian and writer who we both know and admire. There is a priest in the Church of England called Azariah France Williams, who some of you will know and whose writing you might know. And he wrote a book called Ghost Ship, which is an uncompromising account of racism and racial injustice in the Church of England and how pervasive it is. And he had a campaign to raise some funds to make the best audiobook ever out of this book. And one of the things, if you contributed rather a lot of money, I dare say, to his crowdsource funding campaign, one of the things that you could choose to have was a workshop with Natalia-Nana Lester Bush. So I turn up online, and there you were. And I was like, this is really cool. I'm learning a lot. And one of the first encounters, therefore, that we ever had was when, like this evening, I was learning from you in a group and exploring how aspects of liberation and intersectionality can work together for the spiritual common good in its most foundational and most precious form. I also recall that I wasn't feeling very well that day.
You just had your
and
COVID
you
jab?
gave me, I just had my, wow,
yeah.
you remember this. I just had my COVID jab, and you gave me what I can only describe as radical permission to leave when I felt awful.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that too. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here with us at St. Pancras, that you're with us for those who are joining online as well, and that we can enjoy your company and learn from you together. Over to you. Share a little bit, if you wish, about who you are, where you're coming from, and what you'd like to explore.
Would love to. And also afterwards, I really want to know, how much did you have to contribute? What was I worth? Because I gave it as a gift.
It was really expensive.
That's okay. Tell me after. Yeah, I want to know. And I should say, if you haven't read Ghost Ship, like you said, yes, it is an uncompromising, narrative of institutional racism in the Church of England. But Azariah is such a beautiful storyteller. The book opens with this amazing story and this creative imagining. So I feel like I wish I'd done this PR, because I'm like, bruv, it's a little bit dry. Like institutional racism in the Church of England, I'm not buying that. But actually, when I then read the opening chapters, oh my gosh, I'm buying this. This book is so radically connecting and integrating, and you feel it and connect it in your own body. So yeah, Azariah is an absolute ledge. But from Azariah to me. So hi, I'm Natalia-Nana. Pronouns that I use are she or they. A visual description for anyone for whom that's helpful. I am a mixed race, like light brown skinned woman. I have got dark brown curly hair, and I'm wearing gold glasses today and a camel top, if that's helpful for anyone to picture who might have visual differences. So I don't know what else to say.
One of the reasons why I was glad that you said yes to this is that it's Disability History Month for another few days until the 20th of December, and we are in these final days of Advent as we long for God with us, born in this fragile yet strong way. And so when we were speaking about what you might choose to share in relation to these different themes coming together, what came across so strongly in our conversation is that you wanted to explore hope and waiting, and you wanted to explore it using a passage which initially completely surprised me. I hope you all have the handout, because I was like so thrown. And then the way that, I didn't tell you at the time, but I was
You
super
were
thrown. I
super
was like,
chilled with
oh
it.
yeah,
I
cool.
was
And
like,
internally
oh,
I was like,
cool.
what are we doing? So take us on this adventure. And if you would like to guide us through this, if you'd like to read it and explore as you go as a way of opening this through scripture, that would just be fantastic.
Okay. Well, yeah, Ayla and I have had a few conversations about this, and I am really iterative. Like, I go back to an idea, go back again. And I love external processing. So Ayla sort of had me just blah, 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 and then it's sort of like find the nugget, find the gold in that. And yeah, I was just thinking about hope and waiting and Advent. We always read the same verses, like, no offense, Church of England and all that, but we don't listen, we don't hear, because you just know, oh yeah, and that's what happens. And I also love just being more creative and looking at, okay, what would be really fitting verses for a time of waiting and a time of trying to hope, you know, of hoping when we're actually having to deconstruct what hope even means. Especially, you know, thinking of the geopolitical climate, the environmental climate, the financial climate, as well as many of us in our relationships and our inner climate. There's turmoil and tumult. So having to recreate and rewrite for ourselves and as a society and as a church, what is hope? And don't give me no saccharine, like just, you know, wait on the Lord and it will come. I'm like, okay, and what does that look like when Donald Trump's about to have more power than anyone has had in decades with a right-wing agenda? What does that look like for people with Black and brown and disabled and queer bodies? What does that look like? And for some reason, this story came to me when I was asking Mama God, what does this look like? So if it's helpful for you, if you like taking in things and picturing, then feel free to maybe close your eyes. If you want to visualize the story for yourself, if it's more helpful to read along, then feel free to do that. But I'll just read what is called the parable of the sower. So the context is, this is Jesus with his apprentices, his students, we call disciples. Here we go. So about that time, Jesus left the house and sat on the beach. In no time at all, a local crowd had gathered around him, all along the lakeside, forcing him to get into a boat. Using the boat as a pulpit, he preached to this impromptu congregation, telling them stories and teachings. What do you make of this? He said. A farmer planted seed. As she was scattering the seed, some seed fell on the path. And then later that day, the birds ate it. Some of the seed that she'd sown fell on gravel. It sprouted really, really quickly with light soil between the path, but it didn't put down any roots. So when the sun came out, it just withered up and died as quickly as it came up. Some of the seeds she sown fell in the weeds, and as it started to grow, it just got choked up and overwhelmed by the weeds. And some of the seed fell on good, fertile earth and produced a harvest beyond her wildest dreams. Are you listening? Are you really? So I'm sorry, I should have given a warning before I read that I never read verbatim, and I will always just flex and flow with whatever comes to me. So I apologize if that was jarring for anyone. But I love this, and I was disappointed actually that even in the Message version, the farmer was he. And I just gently invite you to think about, did that make a difference to you? Me gender switching, the story make a difference? You know, church can be such a gendered binary place, which is really, really funny because Christians are like, I don't see color, we're all one in Christ, but here's the women's group, here's the men's group, here's the kids group, here's the old group. Like, we're happy to divide by age and by gender. Like, here, you guys go make a bookmark, we're gonna go throw axes. Okay. But having worked in international charity work, I just learned that most of the world's farmers are female. You know, most of the people who make our food, who grow it, who tend to it, who cultivate it, are gendered as cis women, female. Cis just means like, it's Latin for same, just women who are the same gender that got ticked when they were born. And even just that, I just invite you to reflect for yourself maybe later on of like, oh, does it make a difference picturing a woman? Who do we normally picture as the farmer in this story? Does it make a difference actually learning, and it's factual, that most of the farmers in the world are female?
When you made that decision about gender and opening up imaginative possibilities in order to maybe stretch at the limits of what we might think of, what I or anyone else might think of as the possibilities of imagery in Scripture, it reminded me of two things. It reminded me that when Jesus speaks in parable, he's painting a kind of picture with words, but in that word poetic experience, everyone's images will be different to an extent. Everyone's going to have a different image going on. And so why not continue to embellish, to thread through, to make more and better art in relation to that word, picture, image that he's offering? What's on offer is always, with Jesus, much bigger than what our imaginations can consider. And so if you're inviting us to take that step into questioning our imaginations so that we can consider more deeply, that feels like an Advent step for me. And it makes me think about women and agriculture in situations of climate emergency where the world is burning, in situations of utter economic precarity, in situations of huge questions around capitalism, microfinance, and the persistence of poverty in relation to high skill set, but also sometimes malnutrition, low energy, low certainty about education as well, and about family possibilities of various configurations. And so what I see now, when in my mind's eye, I'm exploring this together with you, and I'm watching this and I'm listening to you, is a woman with a child on her back. And that too is a very Eucharistic thing. That's a very Advent thing. That's a very Christmas thing. This is a woman where perhaps having planted some seed, noticing that it's fallen in the gravel, thinking about what is and isn't growing, considering why, considering the lavishness of all that seed, but also thinking, if this could grow, and perhaps it will, what would that mean in terms of community, space, development? And then pausing and breastfeeding her child, because that's the plan for right now, because her child is hungry. And I'm just curious about what that image does in me when I consider Mary and Christ and belonging and a different kind of imaginative perspective. It's sort of like reconsidering what otherwise can be a bit of a same old kind of parable. So the point that you made at the beginning about being like, we read all the same old stories. Yeah, but we don't have to have the same old vision. The Bible needn't confine us. We have only ourselves to blame. I have only myself to blame if I'm like, whoa, that's that passage from Isaiah, and I'm tuning out because I've heard it 1,000 times. That's a bummer. It doesn't have to be like that.
Though. I don't think it is only yourself to blame, because you exist in a construct, you exist in an institution, and you exist in like the institution of all institutions where there's a reading for the day and it's this Bible version and so on. And also we exist in this, post-Victorian society where we are so disembodied and so uninitiative taking that it's like, who's giving us permission to reimagine? Because reimagining scripture is so often contended, even just changing the gender of like, God has no gender, but how dare you call her mother? Of like, of course, you're not going to just radically take that permission, because unfortunately, and it really shouldn't be, but taking permission to be creative, taking permission to play with the Bible is radical. Like, play with it. What would it be to cut and paste up different parts of the story and move them around? That could be so transformational, and that isn't taught, and especially in the Church of England, where it's really big on cutting out chunks of it wasn't labeled chapter 13, verse such and such. It was a scroll. It just continued, and it was never read in isolation. It was never meant to be read as a daily Bible verse. Like, it's actually kind of sacrilegious. It was never meant to be. It would be, you take the scroll out and you read it in community. And actually, it only got written down, after the temple destruction in AD, 30 something. Anyway, so really it was verbal. It was people chatting to their neighbor. What do you think he means about the bird? Why is she throwing all the seed everywhere? Like, it's meant to be more communicative and more playful and more grappled with than church allows it to be. And yeah, you can give yourself that permission. But again, you'd then be going against the grain. Going against the grain is so much harder and unnatural, and you need initiators and imaginers to provoke that in you, to permit that in you.
I'm curious about how aspects of queerness and background culturally in the widest possible set of frameworks, and how aspects of disabled life come into that prospect of a wider vision of belonging and a wider vision of hope, and perhaps even ideas about play, where there might be some sense of surprise or discovery on the other side of just letting ourselves go and allowing ourselves to radically be one another as God invites us to be. What do you think about that?
I think that I learned so much that I'm a disabled woman, multiple disabilities, and I think that I learned far more from queer and disabled communities and Black liberational communities about love and community and liberation and freedom than I ever have in 15 years in church. I recognize that it was like, yay, victory when, gay marriage was legalized. And I was just so disappointed. Not with it being legal, like, great, yeah, but so disappointed that all we did was say, cool, you can come and fit this restrictive, limited, one-size-fits-all box that we have. Of like, what? The LGBTQ community is amazing at reimagining because they've had to. What is family when your biological family rejects you? Or when they don't see you? When they will dead name you? What is family and life beyond your own when you physically can't procreate and therefore you're creative? What is family when you maybe don't have access to siblings to have that aunt, uncle, or sibling role? Okay, like, chosen family gets created. What are gender roles about how we divide the housework? When you start from scratch, because you're not coming into that relationship with predefined social expectations and you can't impose on it. Well, this is what I saw my mum and dad do, so that's my norm. You have to start with a blank slate. And we had an opportunity to do that with marriage. What about offering 5 different types of marriage? Do you want a marriage where you do share your worldly goods? Cool, crack on for you. If that suits you, if that works for you. I know someone who loves her partner deeply, wants to spend her life with him, but having gone through a traumatic marriage where she then lost everything financially and her security with that and her inheritance from her deceased parents, there's no way that she would bring herself to ever yoke what she has earned to someone else. well, what about saying you don't have to? That doesn't make you less married because you ain't sharing your bank account. Like, what about marriage where you don't have to live together? What about marriage where, okay, I'm going to run out of ideas. Anyway, you get the picture. What about marriage where it's not forever? It's like, cool, let's commit for 20 years and then see who we are then, or we have a renewal option. Just blue sky thinking, what is it? What could it be? And I guess I love applying that to so many areas of disabled communities are often far more creative again on community. Of my friends who understand disability and my friends who are also disabled, not through any malice or ill will, they understand me and my needs far more than even my parents. My dad was over recently. My dad lives in Estonia. I always light up when I talk about my dad because he was just such a flipping joker. Like, damn. But my dad was over, and I can't remember if he said it. I'm looking at Anna, she's my housemate. I can't remember if she said it or if he wrote it, but he was like, yeah, lovely trip, so good to see you, Hadn't realized quite how crippled you are, or disabled you are, or something like that. And I was just like, one, thank you. Two, you can't say that, Dad. But he just meant it in a like, wow, I hadn't realized how many challenges you experience, and also like, wow, you're really slaying in your work, like, go you, but I hadn't realized how hard it was for you. And of course, I haven't lived with him for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. So there's something, coming back to your question of, yeah, the way that communities recreate and question the norm, not for the sake of being contrary, but often communities who have not been invited in church, or in social spaces. Like, I'm sure it's a lovely inclusive church, yada, yada. And actually St. James like really is, and St. Pancras is, but for the most part, when we talk about the church and inclusion, it's, you're welcome here and you won't be turned away at the door like you would have been 50 years ago. And if you're like straight performing, straight presenting, you're welcome to do a Bible reading. Yeah, if you're Black but not like radical, liberational with it, then you're welcome to serve communion, or better yet, do the accounts. But actually, who are we seeing in these? Who's the worship leader? Who's the youth pastor? Who's the preacher when the vicar's away? Generally, it's still John. Whereas in queer communities and disabled communities, there is just so much more reinventing and questioning and creating. Unfortunately, because they've had to, and because so often we failed them. Mm-hmm. But also, I get energized by seeing that beauty and that creativity.
One of the things that breaks my heart over and over again about the church as such is that the bar is so horribly low. So one of the things that is really powerful about St. James's and also about St. Pancras here, right in the middle of the city, is that there's loads of opportunities for celebrating queer joy of various kinds. And Piccadilly is now the Pride route, right? So Pride Parade right down Piccadilly. So we make a bit of an effort. And largely because of Elijah as Barbara and the amazing Pride of St. James group and everybody else who was like, yeah, we're going to be here. We're going to do this stuff. The courtyard was, as we sometimes call it, activated, and the church too. And we thought spaces of joy and fun and lots of Britney Spears and silliness, spaces of, well, there you go.
You lost me there, mate.
She was not there particularly, but there you go. And spaces of rest in the church, that the garden is a space, that there was loads of face painting, that there was all sorts of stuff going on. And one of the things that happens too is that a whole bunch of us just stand on the route with signs that say things like, God is queer and she is fabulous, and stuff like that. And the thing that I find most disturbing, but also somehow the most hopeful as this tiny little glimmer, is someone who says, is this really a church? Are you really saying and doing what you're saying and doing? And this is really a church. Am I allowed to come in? And it's the allowed where I think this is devastating. It's true. And so to be able to offer something different as an alternative shouldn't be an alternative. But there's also something about the power dynamic of inclusion, where when you were talking about that in terms of what the signs of belonging are, and what the signs of rejection or refusal or a defensiveness or a panic or whatever it might be. And one of the rules of thumb that I like to use, and this wouldn't be everybody's vibe, but it's mine, is that if someone has said to me as a queer, disabled person, oh, you're welcome here, I include you. If I say, thank you, I include you too, if that seems kind of normal, if I can put it that way, where it's like, great, we all participate together, then maybe that is indeed a place of belonging in a way which really has meaning and depth. But if it seems like that person or that group is like, what do you mean? I get to include you. You don't get to, what's your weird back chat about being like, oh yes, thank you. Well, I include you in my world as well. If that feels like it's got some grit in it, then something's gone wrong in the prospect of a community of genuine belonging. And things go wrong all the time. And so I want to be aware of that in myself too, as someone who, like many here, in one way or another, lay or ordained, gets to participate in a language and in a community building of hope, or not. We've got work to do. I definitely have work to do. And so that's one of those little things that I keep in mind where I think, how are we going in terms of mutuality here?
I love that. I love that because it's making me think, and also I really had to try and follow you with your whole "what are you saying" thing. So I'm going to reflect on that more later because I haven't thought of it that way. So thank you. I'm going to delve into why I chose that in a moment, but this is not what you asked me to be here for, but I can't help but do it and just give that reflection of it is great that churches are at like the mainstream pride, the corporate supported pride. And I remember seeing Southwark Cathedral years ago fly the then sort of, standard LGBTQ flag. And I was like, that is wicked to see flying above Borough Market, a really traditional cathedral that you can't mistake for anything but. That is absolutely sick. And then seeing some of their vicars at Pride that year was wicked. And also, it's so white. It's just so white. And I say that with vehemence because it hasn't just organically become so white. In the city that has 46% people of global majority identity, that's been intentional. Like Pride has, not unintentionally overtly, but probably through unconscious biases and preferences, Pride has become this place for white, generally like white male queerness to be centered. And that is beautiful because that has often been excluded. But when it's only centering white male queerness, that's a problem. So what I would love and what my own workplace is actually growing in is going to Black Pride. I think it's not either or, it's both. Are we there on the Sunday or do we go home when the big parade that gets the TV front page, that gets all the corporate sponsors, that has floats inspired by, obviously, Caribbean culture from Notting Hill Carnival? Welcome. Like, do we then go on the Sunday and go to the marginalised group of Black Pride? As someone who goes to both, there is a sense of safety that I feel at Black Pride that I just cannot feel in a white majority church and cannot feel at mainstream Pride. And what is both painful and beautiful is that actually this year I was there with some white colleagues. We actually did like a work thing there, it's wicked. And my white best friend came with me. And I was like, how do you feel? And she was like, I just feel perfectly fine. I was like, I'm really, really glad that this community is doing that for you. And I'm really sad that that is not once ever how I am able to feel in a white majority community. Because there'll always be someone who you're like, are they looking at me away? Is it? Am I truly, truly safe? And that's partly, again, the work that whiteness needs to do in looking in and leaning into race and being that proactive voice so that you're able to see the things that people with melanin can see. Much in a similar way that, men have needed to step up, and some have, post Me Too, and realize, wow, you mean you're having a whole different experience in the same room at the same event than me? Like, what? But he didn't say anything, he just gave you a hug. And post Me Too, we know, like, oh, if I see my girlfriend, like, oh, he gave me a hug. She knows, like, oh, God, are you okay? Like, did it stir? So I think we've had this wonderful opportunity that we can now hopefully apply to race. But my challenge, my sadness, my invitation for St. James, for St. Pancras would be, okay, now, if you're looking at your LGBTQ plus community, looking at who is not in there, which Black queers, which disabled queers, which deaf queers, et cetera, which older queers are not included. And that's not about then saying we're going to change that space that's working for so many, but it's saying, well, wow, if only there were other days in the year when we could do other things for other people and use it in that creative way. So.
Yeah, you reminded me of this great moment where there were a lot of people at St. James's for Trans Pride, as well as marching in Trans Pride, which is 4 weeks after, as you say, sort of like main classic and sometimes quite corporatized and huge kind of pride with all that entails. And one of my favorite moments is that our safeguarding officer at St. James's, who is trans, marching in Trans Pride protest, and all of us being like, it's the safeguarding officer, wave to Charlie. And I was like, this is a really interesting and significant moment, because it's a moment where it's just community and congregation being themselves. And I'm wondering about the relationship between being oneself, the experience of the Advent longing to meet Jesus, who is the storyteller Jesus, the parable of the sower Jesus, and to meet the Jesus who is calling us not just to be thoroughly ourselves, but to see the best of the divine light in one another. And to me, sometimes that has to do with pause, rest. And there's a great writer whose work I'm sure you know called Trisha Hersey about rest as resistance. And sometimes she calls herself the nap bishop, right? Because she had this, many of you will know about this too, she had this art project. She had this really powerful experience where she filled this room, if I'm getting this right, but please correct me if this isn't right, with lots of soft space and just pillows and blankets and candles and gentleness. And the art performance, the shared community experience, was that she invited people to come in and take a nap. And people wept because somehow in that invitation to rest, something happened that was just beyond. And so now she's like, right, I've got to go all over the world and not just talk about napping, but encourage some napping experience. And God's promise to us is a promise of rest. God teaches us how to rest. I wonder what rest in this Advent time, in this season of short days, what does rest mean to you in your selfhood and at this time of the year?
Great question. I think immediately I want to clarify, also to say, then short days of daylight, they're not short days. You know, for many people like myself in chronic pain, with insomnia, I was up till 3 a.m. yesterday. And actually so much happens at night. I walked and put some of my Christmas cards in the post box at 1 a.m. in the morning and just took a walk around. Not for too long, because I was like, well, don't be stupid, right? Like, steady on now. But just even thinking of that, of actually there are whole communities of people for whom actually the darkness maybe isn't different. It's okay. That is actually when they come alive. That is actually when they wake. What might inclusive church look like that includes that? What might a monthly service that is on at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. when I'm finally awake look like? And things like that. So just thinking of that and rest, and not sort of turn it into a TED talk, but I did a talk so the cathedral. I did a workshop day, a whole day on radical rest with St. Paul's Cathedral in their program of like rest for weary activists, and basing it on Dr. Chandra Dalton's 7 modalities of rest, and looking at like, what does your body need for rest? What does your mind need for rest? What do your senses need for rest? What does your heart connection and spiritual self need for rest? What does your social self need for rest? And just inviting us to think more, because laying down, having a nap is beautiful, but it's also very easy to hear that story, hear that example, and think of it very one-dimensionally.
Yes.
To think, oh, they all slept. And it was like, yes, and when it says, God rested on the last day, there's a beautiful image that I'd seen that a kid had drawn, like God in a hammock at a beach, and I was like, I love that, gorgeous, babe. And there's a bit more to it. Like, also, I hope that, what if God was just chilling out with the Trinity, if that's something that you believe in? What if God was hanging out with God's self? Or what if actually God was like, I don't want to see no angels today. Actually, I just need to not. We've been working a lot. We've made a lot. We've done a lot. Great. Good work, team. Bye. And God was with God's self, like that recharging rest. And yes, people physically napped. But I don't think the physical nap is what brought people to the emotional space of tears. I think the mental and emotional rest that they were able to let themselves lean into. I think being able to divest from capitalism and divest from performativism and divest from doing, and that narrative that is so prevalent and pernicious in church. Sorry to come up in your church and like drag y'all, but this idea that is so pernicious, like meaning really, really evil, and just worms its way in like the weeds, that you rest because then you can serve God better. Like, Ayla, get a good rest, because then you'll be able to come back and be a better servant. Do you know? No, I call
Oh my God,
no.
that makes me feel physically queasy.
Right? No, I rest because I need to rest, and because I am entitled to rest. Yeah. And because I want to rest. And here's the thing, my wants aren't innately sinful, because God made me and said, very good. Mwah. So rest for me in this season is very much, and I say this season not just in Advent, that constructed season, but this season of my liberational journey that I'm still on, and hopefully will forever be on, of where I'm at in it, is trying to connect within myself more. I'm very connected and attuned with my body because I need to be, because of living with chronic pain. But trying to connect more with, the emotional rest. I'm very disconnected with my emotions. I can talk about them. My therapist's like, you can put it into so many words. Great. I'm like, awesome. I processed them. She's like, So now we're going to move from your head to your heart. I'm like, isn't the time up? You want me to feel what I'm talking about? Babe, I just gave you an articulate description. What? I've cognitively identified it. So rest for me in this season is connecting more with what's going on here and here, connecting with what's going on with the body, checking in with, are my wants, or are they wants that I have maybe absorbed or seen performed by others? And there's nothing wrong with that, but what gives me more joy is recognizing, oh, okay, you've inherited that. You're doing that because you're performing the role. You're doing that because you think that's what being good is, or you think that's what being compassionate is, or that's what being kind is. Okay, do you want to do that? Does that sit right with you right now, sweetheart? Is that good for you right now? What might an alternative be? What might a compromise be? To just walking around things a lot more, turning them over like I imagine a diamond expert does, of looking at the color and the cut and the clarity and so on. Doing that with my rest and asking myself, what do I really need? What do I really want? And what do I not need? What do I not want? And why? The why is what I'm really leaning into.
Leaning into the why reminds me of something that we heard in our reflection time at the Sanctuary Eucharist earlier this evening, where Audrey reminded us that our God is the God who has this really intense conversation, and in the middle of this intense conversation looks at his followers, looks at his closest crew and says, who do you say that I am? Never mind the noise, who do you say that I am? And I had one of the most meaningful conversations I've ever had with my spiritual director, is when he asked me to kind of get into that And he said, you know, all of the noise that's flowing around all over the place, so many of the things that you've mentioned and that you've brought into this space to remind us, as well as to encourage us to consider that why for ourselves. See what happens when the question, diamond-like, gets shifted around. And if it was me asking this question, asking God, asking of the Trinity, being curious in the presence of Jesus, I'm going to gesture up, but we don't have to gesture up. It could be anywhere. Who do you say that I am? What God wants for us and what God declares when God looks at each of us as God looks at you and says, very good. That's an exciting thing to get back to, but it's also very risky, because it might involve an enormously chaotic amount of deconstruction, that sort of Velcro pull, which can be tough. On the other side, go ahead.
Like, sorry, I just jump in. I'm the majority. But it also doesn't have to. Often I don't lean into my emotions because I'm preempting. Well, that's going to make me feel really bad. So I'm grieving at the moment. I lost a really dear old friend just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now. And my coach was sort of like, okay, well, what would it be to sit with those feelings? I was like, crap. It would be crap. Why would I do that? I'm not stupid. It would be awful. So how about we instead talk about racism in the workplace? Because I can go to town on that. But what was interesting is being like, okay, well, you don't have to lean into it. You don't have to. You can choose. You can park it, but at least know that you're parking it. You can look at stuff and be like, wow, actually, yeah, I have inherited that, or that has actually been shaped by the white supremacist, patriarchal, neoliberal, capitalist society that I'm in. What would I think if I was thinking for myself with a blank sheet? Doesn't mean you have to run and get that blank sheet if you're like, whoa, that's intimidating, that's Velcro, I don't want to rip that up. I might rip off some skin, that's uncomfortable. But I think there's something so empowering and safe in saying, okay, I'm not going to clear out those boxes in the loft right now of my heart, the loft of my mind, but I know they're there and I've labeled them. Maybe I'll come to them one day, maybe not. But there's something for me really empowering and just saying, I'm choosing not to go into that. It's not my fear, whether that's fear of being rejected by the church, fear of being rejected by family or friends, fear of not knowing yourself, fear of falling apart and how scary it will be. It doesn't have to be scary, because you don't have to go any further, any farther, any faster, or any deeper than you choose to go. Just absolutely love that Jesus, Yeshua, never drags the disciples anywhere. They follow him. So you can follow your own spirit, your heart, your yearning, the Holy Spirit's nudging, whatever language you use, as far, as deep, as quick or as slow, as feels safe, as feels good for you, as feels healthy for you. And you certainly don't steer it alone.
With all of that in mind, I wonder what it is that draws you to these quotations from Rebecca Solnit's Hope in the Dark. We talked about this, and I really love this too, so I was delighted that this is something that you wanted to share. And to me, that experience of the womb and the grave darkness, and how that relates to that wider theme that Rebecca Solnit has of hope in the dark, and how that connects to a lot that you shared. You can take this in any direction you wish. What is it about
you're like,
that?
Because
you're gonna. What is it about that first short, beautiful, and complex sentence that really does it for you? What is it about that where you're like, yep, that's important?
How much time have we got? What is it?
I don't know, like a couple minutes.
Cool. So the quote from Rebecca Solnit, who is an activist and author, says, "The future is dark, with a darkness as much of the womb as the grave." And that's an extract taken from her book, Hope in the Dark, which is really, it's really honest about, like, the world is on fire. Like, the world is absolutely on fire. It is a cluster mess. It is tangled. It is, and she's really good at not being all optimistic, like, oh, but it's a darkness of the womb, because the womb leads to good things. She's like, it's actually 50-50. It could be, this could be womb-like. We can make this womb-like. We can, and that means there's going to be pain. That means there's going to be fear. You know, pregnancy is the most dangerous thing the human body can go through. And also there could be life and hope and change and upset and a lot of noise and upheaval and joy and connection at the end of this. And also it could be grave-like. It could be saying goodbye to civilization as we know it. If we continue to see the far right in Europe, in North America, like, we're seeing things get heavier. So I love how, is that me? I didn't move, I promise.
Sometimes it does that. It's okay.
Okay, babe. But I love how she holds those two together, of hope, not in darkness, but hope as darkness. And I was particularly drawn to this because I'm trying to eradicate darkness from my vernacular, like from the way I speak, when everyone's talking about something negative, and I have to be intentional, because I automatically talk about, oh, I'm in a really dark time at the moment, or, oh, that's dark comedy, or dark humor, which I love, by the way. I'm like, no, darkness is not negative. No. Darkness is soil, and it's partly why I bringing it back to that verse of, darkness is where things grow. Darkness is where you rest every night. Darkness is where stars come out and literally save lives through navigation. Darkness is what cocoons the baby, a fetus in the womb. Darkness is what nourishes and protects the seed as it grows. How dare our culture only ever use darkness when we're talking about something sad and heavy and bad? No, I call no. So I'm personally trying to excavate that from my language. And I would love to see church doing that more. I would love to see church talking about the beauty of darkness, of wow, Jesus, Yeshua was cocooned in darkness for 3 days before he resurrected, if that's something you physically believe happened. But before he was taken out of those grave clothes, he was cocooned tightly. Grave clothes were bandaged, tightly swaddled. He was cocooned in darkness. Like, wow, our God knows darkness, and it ain't just negative and something to be liberated from. It's something also that can be growing, something that can be protecting and cocooning. Who doesn't love just a duvet day? Over my head, the world is away, and it's just me and mama and my Spotify playlist, and life is good under here. So I love this reclaiming of darkness. And for me, it does flow quite naturally from thinking about the soil and this farmer. And to end on this, just talking about why I chose this verse, it really came to me as, stop that please. It came to me as, so like, what is hope in a time when the world is on fire? And if you are a reader, or like Rebecca Sonnet's book really looks at that, it's not being an optimist, not being a pessimist, but how to be a hope-giving person, a hope-filling person, a hopeful person. And I love that she distinguishes them. Like, hope isn't optimism. Hope is something different, hope based on reality. And I call myself a practical dreamer, a pragmatic optimist. And that's what I think of with this farmer, of she's sown this, she's planted this soil, likely with the baby on her back, up until the invention of the plow. women and men, cis women and men, farmed side by side. And it was only really with the invention of the plow, which made it unsafe for children to run around whilst the farming was happening, that we saw the move of women into the house, into the domestic sphere. Before that, men and women worked along side by side, and women and children just ran around while they were farming. You didn't have to have hidden childcare. And that's what this culture would have been like. It would have been using the hoe. And side fact, but cultures that use the hoe, like still developed with handheld farming, were generally far more gender equal for a lot longer until colonialism came along. But they stayed more gender equal because men and women worked side by side in the farming, and the women's work was still visible and not hidden off in the home. And gender care was much more equal because a man would pick up a baby that was running into something or about to trip over something. And just like in Ghana, it's lovely to think like, yes, sometimes men will have a baby on their back in the house. Never out the house, obviously, gosh no, but in the house. So I sort of imagine this. She's an active hope. She sowed the seed. Before that, she would have prepared the ground. She'd have turned it over, tilled it. It's a really bad analogy because I don't actually know how you garden. But then she will have watered and fertilized. She's active in this. She's not just waiting for nature to do its thing. She's working with nature, through nature. And also, she has to wait. She can't pull the seed up. She has to accept that birds are going to eat some of it, and weeds are going to choke some of it. And she's still hoping on that harvest and tending to it and checking that it's sprouting and watering if the sun has been too harsh, maybe covering it if the rain is too strong and it's going to wash away the seed before it's really taken root. She's active and she's participating in the hope. That's what I think of in this time when the world is on fire, of how can I be active and participate in this and acknowledge the fact that there are weeds and there are birds stealing up good seed, but actually still doing my best and our best to help bring up the harvest with God's strength and God's love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So glad that you wanted to spend time here and to share these things in these ways at this threshold time of the year and at this point in everyone's very different and yet somehow shared and cherished lives. I'm so glad you came, and I'm so glad that we've had a chance to talk. And right at the end of the translation that you chose for this story, Jesus asks, are you listening to this? Really listening? So thank you for calling us and for inviting us to listen in all sorts of ways that listening can change us. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, sister.